guys, how's it going? Today I'm back here with another engine video. Figured since I've drugged this one out for the show, I might as well do a dedicated video on it since I haven't done one yet. This is my Lauson VA powered water pump. The actual pump company itself is Humdinger. It's a, what does it say, Ralph B. Carter Company, Hackensack, New Jersey. It's a self-priming centrifugal pump. It's quite a lake drainer, I'll tell you that much. It moves a lot of water. But it's being powered by a Lauson Model VA, as you can see there. And for those of you guys who aren't super familiar with these are the very first small air-cooled engines that Lauson ever made. Prior to this, Lauson had only made hit-and-miss engines, and then they started to get into the small air-cooled market, and this was their first engine. I don't remember how many horsepower it is. It can't be much, but it's a pretty neat engine. So I got this thing at Cool Spring last year, actually. It was a widow. I forget the name of the collector, but the widow of the collector was selling off her husband's collection, and there was just a trailer full of stuff, and way tucked in the back was this thing. And I was like, wow, that's really cool. I might need that. But I had no idea what they were asking. I figured it'd be worth like way more than I was willing to pay, because I saw one of these engines just by themselves at the Dublin show for quite a bit. And then I talked to them, and they actually made a pretty good offer for this thing, which I couldn't really say no to. So a little while later we agreed on a deal after going back and forth just a little bit, and came home with this thing. She said that he had it running at every Cool Spring show for the last several years, so I didn't need to do too much to it. And that was true. I brought it, even at the show I fired it up and I had it pumping. And I didn't do that much to it. The few things that I did do are cleaned out the Tillotson carburetor there, which is actually currently leaking, so I'll have to take a look at that. In the meantime, I'll just shut the gas off. Clean that out. Did some valve work to it because they needed lapped in pretty bad, because the thing just fired really hard and erratically, and it didn't sound quite right, so I figured something was wrong. Then last year when I had it running at our show, it was still doing the same thing and it bothered me, so I took a look at this governor, did a little bit of adjustment on that, and what finally ended up being the case was that the spark plug in it was bad. So I switched the spark plug out, and it started running much better. Also put a new muffler on it because the one it came with was all like fabric-cobbled together, and I didn't really like the look of it. And then I just redid the plumbing off the pump a little bit. But overall, it's a really neat piece. This engine's got some pretty unique features to it, and now it runs much better. It's still got a slight skip, but I'll show you why in a minute. It's got some hours on it. But yeah, got the grease cup with some seal to grease the seal here in between the pump and the engine, and he left some packing material tied to it just in case he ever had to redo the seal, I guess. I also added this just to make draining the oil a little bit easier, so I don't have to dump it all over the frame. I have no idea whether this cart / frame is original or not. It looks like it was made based on the way that this angle iron was welded together, so I'm going to guess it wasn't original, but whoever made it did a pretty good job. It's a good size, and I like the way that it's made. It's got a front swivel wheel here with the handle. As you can see that they're all steel. It's a nice turning setup, and the wheels on the back look pretty period, and they're pretty cool. I think at one point in its life it may have been repainted, because there's some green popping through there, and also these wheels have some red in them too. So I don't know. Also, there's green paint on here though, so who knows? I'm actually not entirely sure. Somebody might be able to let me know about that. Also, at some point in its life, this magneto was replaced. This originally had a Wyco mag of sorts. It was basically, I believe, it was an earlier version, and it was like the rotary version of the Wyco EK. So it spins, but it kind of worked inside the way that the EKs did. But they were known to have issues and aren't super reliable. And so somebody along the lines replaced it with a newer Wyco Model X. This has got an impulse mechanism on it, and this actually works great. I'm really glad they did that. And most people wouldn't know the difference anyways. In here is the centrifugal governor. You can see there's probably helical gears in there to get it on a right angle, and then there's a bunch of weights that spin around. That lifts this lever up and down. Obviously it's overhead valve, as you can see. got two cute little valves there and the rockers, and you'll see it going up and down in a bit. And it is air cooled. It's kind of like a Delco light plant. There's a big flywheel here with some fins, and that pulls air down over the valves and around the cylinder and then out the front, which is also kind of unique. Tube mount Lauson carburetor. It's an MS220 for those of you guys who are curious. But yeah, this thing's definitely got some hours on it. It runs good, it doesn't smoke or anything. I had the head off, there's a little bit of slop in the piston, but I just decided that I wasn't going to get into it. As much as I like pulling them all apart and making them perfect and whatnot, I doubt that I could ever get any parts for this thing anyways. And seeing as though it runs so good already, I figure if it ain't broke, don't fix it. Somebody, speaking of fixing, somebody has fixed this though. That's all brazed back together there. And there's quite a bit of slop in these, just from wear. You can see somebody put a washer on there because when they fixed this, they didn't center the pin. So they made up with it for a washer. But yeah, they're quite sloppy. The valves guides themselves are pretty worn too, so the valves don't seat 100% all the time, which is what the skip probably is caused by. And as you probably saw down here, there's some washers and stuff because all these, well, the throttle shaft itself moves quite a bit, and then obviously there's a ton of slop in between here and there. You can see just how much that's moving in there. So I tried to make up with it with some washers and whatnot. I need to trim my cotter pin. I never did that last year. So that also doesn't help. It definitely is sucking a little bit of air, and it's a little bit sloppy, but like I said, it runs pretty damn good. And overall, I'm pretty happy with it, and it's a really, really neat piece. So I guess without further ado, why don't we fire it up and I'll show you guys how it runs, and let's pump some water. Let's go ahead and fire it up here. Disclaimer, this is not a cold start. I've had it running for a while now because I'm letting it run for a little while before the show, which is this week, because it sat for a year. But it fires up really good either way. This time when it fires up, it's probably going to run really rich for a bit because it's loaded up with gas from me shutting it off before. But either way, normally you choke it once and then you pull it again and off it goes. And crank, I don't know if I mentioned that before. Here we go. And just like that, we're pumping water. The other really nice thing about that mag with the impulse on it, it just starts so easy. Just one snap of the impulse and off it goes. But yeah, as you can see, it's a pretty neat piece to look at between all the water flowing and then everything spinning and moving on it. Definitely got quite a bark to it too. I might end up trying to put a different muffler on it or quiet this one down a little bit somehow because it's quite loud. It's got, like I said, it's got quite a bark to it, but it's much better than it was because when it was running really rough when I first got it, it was even louder. Now it's running a little smoother. It's much, much better. As you can hear, it's got that slight misfire that I talked about, but I think that's just about as good as I'm going to be able to get this thing, given the worn and the wear and the valves and everything. I honestly think that's most of where that's coming from, is the valves won't seat 100% and it'll miss. But yeah, it's definitely a pretty neat piece. The amount of air that comes out of this flywheel is pretty impressive too. If you're standing about here, you can feel it like, I don't know, 10 feet away even. Something else that's kind of neat, it's got an oil gauge on it. You see here it says full and empty or low. I believe that it works the way that my Leroy engine does, where it's just a cork float that sits in the oil pan and just floats on the oil and it moves the dial on the side. I added the piece of pipe there just to make future oil changes easier because when I did it originally it just made a mess, given the placement of that. And you can see the overhead valves in action. It's a little bit more noticeable in person. On camera it kind of looks like a blur, but it's kind of neat to look at. You see the governor doing its thing here. is also doing its thing. It moves a really impressive amount of water. Like there's a lot of volume there. I'm sure it makes a hell of a lot of pressure too, because this is running pretty slow given where the governor's at. Because this here is your speed adjusting. This is the minimum. So you can see we're almost at the minimum speed there. And it's already moving this much water. I've had it revved up a little bit higher than this and it's insane. Just spraying water into and then out of the bucket. There's also some cool little touches like this, the chain for the gas cap. That way if you're filling it and you drop it, it just sits there. The only thing with this pump that I'm not entirely sure about is that it says self-priming on the front, but it doesn't seem to do that. I usually end up having to prime it. Okay, so self-priming, that doesn't really do that anymore. There's this valve on the top, I'm not entirely sure what it does. And then this is an access plate, and you loosen these, you swing over and you can fill that whole thing up with water. Or if I get lazy, I'll take the garden hose and just shove it up here until it fills it up that way. And then it will start pumping. There's also a built-in drain valve down at the bottom there, which is nice. And I guess this would be a different input or output or something that they have blocked off. I'm not entirely sure. But it works, so I'm not going to touch it. But yeah, it's definitely a showstopper. People really like this thing. And I'm a huge water pump person, so to have such a cool early air-cooled engine like that, you know, made it to the original pump is awesome. But yeah, it's a pretty neat piece. I was definitely very happy with my purchase. Go ahead and shut her down here. Usually like pulling up on the throttle, let it slow down first. This flywheel is way heavier than it looks because this thing will run insanely slow, as you can hear. It will actually sometimes get down to the point where the mag starts snapping on the impulse. So this would do very, very well in a low idle contest because that idle screw can come out a fair bit more and it will keep running. Now you can see the overhead valves working a little bit better. It's actually still trying to pump a little bit too. But then yeah, after that there's a little button on the mag. I'm going to have to use my foot for here. I bet if I let go it will kick right off again. As you can see. But anyways, we'll actually shut it off this time. If you just held that button, this thing would run forever and it would suck so much gas in, especially with the governor trying to open the throttle up and everything. So I found that's probably the best way to shut it down, for its sake especially. But yeah, like I said, it's a pretty damn cool piece. I like it a lot. Very happy with my purchase. And I want to thank the previous owner, if they happen to be watching, for cutting me a bit of a deal on it. I'm hoping that maybe next year, if I get out the Cool Spring, I'll be able to bring it and show it there so she can see it in action again and see it tuned up and running a little bit better. But we'll have to see. It's a bit of a trip for me. Oh, actually, you know what? There's another data tag on this that I missed. I don't know if you guys can read that. It's a little oily. Yeah, Ralph B. Carter Company, Hackfield, New Jersey, USA. And there's a figure number and a shop number. So that's kind of neat. A little more evidence of the green under the red. Not sure if that was the original color or a primer or what. But yeah, if anybody happens to know any more information about this thing than what I've got, I'd love to hear it. I love getting as much information on these things as possible. I'm assuming it's a product of the teens or the 20s. I don't think it could be 30s. It seems too too archaic for that. But yeah, like I said, if anybody has any other info on it, I'd love to hear. But anyways, guys, hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, you know what to do. Hit the little like and subscribe buttons. I'd appreciate that. By all means, leave a comment if you have one, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye.